A secret weapon saved an empire from annihilation. That weapon was Greek fire, a mysterious liquid flame that burned even on water. For centuries, this closely guarded formula was the ultimate shield of the Byzantine Empire, turning the tide of wars and shaping the destiny of continents. By the end of our journey, you will understand how a single chemical marvel preserved a civilization against impossible odds. How did a refugee chemist create such a terrifying substance? And why was its secret so completely lost to time? What does it feel like to face a force that seems to defy the very laws of nature? Constantinople was a city holding its breath. The vast empire it once ruled had been carved away, leaving a desperate fortress on the shores of the Bosporus. This was no longer the invincible Rome of old, but a smaller, strained realm called Byzantium, its back pressed firmly against the sea. To the east, the formidable Persian Empire had only recently been pushed back after a war that nearly broke them. But as one threat receded, a far more dynamic and fervent power was rising from the Arabian deserts. The armies of the new Arab Caliphate, united under a powerful faith, moved with a speed and conviction that stunned the old empires. They swept through the Holy Land, through Egypt, through North Africa, absorbing territories that had been Roman for 700 years, and they did not stop at the coastline. They built fleets. For the first time, the masters of the desert became masters of the waves, and they set their sights on the ultimate prize, the queen of cities herself. Constantinople's walls were legendary on land, but its lifeblood was the sea. All its food, its trade, its connection to the remnants of its provinces came through the water. If an enemy could control the narrow straits around the city, they could strangle it into submission without ever storming a gate. Traditional naval warfare of the time relied on ramming and boarding, a contest of wood and muscle. But the Byzantine navy was outnumbered, its resources stretched thin across a crumbling frontier. They needed something more than bravery and better sailors. They needed a force multiplier, something that could turn one ship into a match for 10. The very survival of their civilization, of the Greek language, of Orthodox Christianity, of 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge and lore, now hung by a thread over the dark water. It was in this crucible of absolute necessity, under the shadow of looming siege, that the order would have been given: find a new way to fight. Do not just match their ships, destroy them. The pressure was not merely political. It was existential, creating a unique environment where any idea, no matter how strange or dangerous, was worth pursuing. This was the moment that called for a miracle, not from a prophet but from a chemist. The story of Greek fire begins not with a grand imperial decree, but with a desperate flight across hostile borders. Our clearest glimpse into its origins comes from a man who was not there, a monk and historian named Theophanes the Confessor, writing in the early 9th century. Theophanes recorded that during the reign of Emperor Constantine IV, in the late 7th century, a refugee arrived at the gates of Constantinople. His name was Kalinikos, and he was a Syrian architect and chemist. He had fled his home, likely from the city of Heliopolis, as the armies of the Arab Caliphate advanced. He carried with him not just his life, but a profound and terrifying knowledge. He presented to the emperor a formula for a new kind of weapon, a prepared fire that would ignite upon impact and could not be extinguished by water. In fact, it seemed to burn more fiercely when it touched the sea. This single account gives us the foundational pillars of the mystery: a name, a timeline, and a potent origin story. It frames the secret not as a purely Byzantine invention, but as a product of cross-pollination, a fusion of Greek alchemical tradition and practical Near Eastern expertise with petroleum and naphtha, substances known in the region for centuries. Kalinikos was not an imperial scientist in a state-sponsored lab. He was a man on the run, offering his unique knowledge as the ultimate ticket to sanctuary and patronage. His story speaks to the fluid movement of ideas even in an age of conflict, where the very technology that could save one civilization was born from the combined wisdom of the empires now clashing. Yet Theophanes wrote his chronicle over 150 years after the events he described. He was compiling histories, not writing an eyewitness report. This distance has led scholars to debate the details, some wondering if Kalinikos was the true inventor or perhaps the man who successfully perfected and weaponized an existing, volatile concept for the Byzantine navy. Whether he was a genius chemist or the crucial adapter, his arrival marks the moment this terrifying substance passed from theory into the hands of an empire with the resources and the desperate need to unleash it. The secret now had a guardian, and that guardian had walls to defend. The weapon needed a vessel worthy of its power. The Byzantine navy's answer was the Dromon, a sleek, fast galley that became the platform for their most fearsome innovation. This was not a weapon you could simply pour from a bucket. It required an entire system, a marriage of engineering and terror. At the very front of the ship, where a traditional ram would be, craftsmen installed something far more sinister, a complex bronze tube known as a siphon. These were not plain pipes. They were often cast into the roaring mouths of lions or the snarling heads of dragons, a deliberate psychological assault meant to unnerve enemies before the first flame even left the ship. Imagine the sight, a silent beast of wood and sail suddenly revealing a metallic maw aimed directly at you. But this was far more than a sculpture. The siphon was the heart of a pressurized delivery system. The thick, sticky liquid fire had to be forced out with tremendous pressure to create a sustained jet, not just a splatter. This likely involved a system of pumps and bellows, possibly even a small, protected brazier to preheat the apparatus and ensure the fuel ignited the moment it met the air. The man who operated this device was one of the most valuable and protected sailors aboard, stationed behind a large, fixed iron shield to guard against arrows. He was a specialist, a technician of annihilation. With his actions, the entire Dromon was transformed from a ship carrying soldiers into a single, unified weapon that could spew a continuous, roaring stream of liquid flame across dozens of feet of open water. This integration turned naval combat on its head. The objective was no longer to get close enough to board, but to stay just close enough to burn. The true terror of Greek fire lay in its impossible behavior, a defiance of nature that seemed almost supernatural to those who faced it. Water, the universal remedy for flame, only made it rage more fiercely. It stuck to wood, sails, and skin with a glue-like tenacity. And once ignited, it appeared to burn with a life of its own, creating a hellscape on the waves that no sailor of the era had any means to combat. This was not magic, but a brutally effective chemical weapon, and while the exact Imperial recipe was lost, modern science has reverse-engineered its probable components from historical descriptions. The base fuel was almost certainly crude petroleum or a lighter, more volatile fraction known as naphtha. The Byzantines had access to natural surface seeps of this black gold around the Black Sea, particularly near the region of Timutarakon. But raw oil alone would not create the legendary substance. It would need to be thickened into a gel so it could be projected in a cohesive stream, and most importantly, so it would cling to its targets. This is where pine resin or sulfur likely came in, acting as a natural thickener that turned the liquid into a sticky, burning napalm. The most ingenious and debated ingredient, however, is quicklime, known chemically as calcium oxide. This substance has a remarkable property. It reacts violently with water, releasing an intense burst of heat. Historians theorize that powdered quicklime may have been mixed into the brew. When the liquid jet hit the seawater, The reaction would have provided an immediate ignition source, creating the terrifying illusion that the sea itself was setting the fire. Some researchers even suggest the presence of saltpeter or potassium nitrate, an early oxidizer that would have helped the mixture burn more fiercely and with less smoke. What emerges is a picture of a devastatingly clever formula, a primitive form of chemical engineering that combined fuel, thickener, and self-igniting catalyst into a single, horrifying package. This was alchemy turned to warfare, transforming common earthly materials into a force that could decide the fate of empires. The formula was perfected, the ships were ready, and the enemy was at the gates. For 4 long years, from 674 to 678, the mighty fleet of the Umayyad Caliphate maintained a relentless blockade of Constantinople. Their ships choked the Sea of Marmara, cutting off the city's lifelines and testing the resolve of every soul behind the Theodosian walls. It was a war of attrition, a slow squeeze meant to starve a civilization into surrender. The Arab commanders knew the land walls were nearly impregnable, so they waited, probing the sea defenses, looking for a single moment of weakness in the Byzantine navy. They were confident in their numbers and their newfound mastery of the sea. What they could not anticipate was that their enemy had rewritten the rules of naval combat entirely. The moment of testing arrived not with a grand, announced battle, but as a sudden, horrifying revelation. The sleek Dromons, which had kept their distance, finally moved into range. Then from the bronze moors of their Siphons came a sight that defied all understanding. Contemporary Arab historians writing of the event captured the sheer shock of that encounter. They described how the Greeks threw fire at us, and it was as if the sky itself was raining flame upon the ships. This was no ordinary fire. It launched in great liquid arcs, a continuous jet of burning pitch that sailed over the water to crash onto wooden decks and billowing sails. The most terrifying property, the one that seemed supernatural, was its persistence. Water did not quench it, it fed it. Sailors who watched their ships catch this hellish flame found their usual tactics useless. Throwing buckets of seawater onto the blaze only made it roar higher and spread wider. The sticky substance clung to everything it touched, turning masts into giant torches and hulls into floating furnaces. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. For warriors who saw the world through a lens of divine favor, this weapon felt like a direct contradiction of nature, perhaps even the wrath of a hostile god. The chaos was absolute. The instinct to flee an inferno is to jump into the sea, but here the sea offered no refuge. Men who leaped overboard found the very water around their ships burning, trapping them in a liquid cage of fire. The orderly lines of the blockade dissolved into a panicked scramble. The strategic effect of this first major deployment was total. The Arab fleet, battered and demoralized, was forced to lift the 4-year siege. The empire, which had been on the very brink, was saved. This baptism by fire did more than win a single battle. It established Greek fire as the ultimate strategic deterrent. For centuries to come, the mere rumor that the Byzantine Dromons carried the liquid flame was enough to give admirals pause, to make armies reconsider the cost of attacking the Queen of Cities. It proved that a single technological marvel, kept secret and deployed with precision, could hold the line against overwhelming force. The weapon had secured its legacy, but its greatest secret, the exact formula, now had to be guarded even more closely than the city walls themselves. The secret was now a greater treasure than any vault of gold. To preserve the terrifying advantage of Greek fire, the Byzantine emperors constructed a fortress of silence around its creation. Production was not farmed out to distant provinces or trusted to independent guilds. It was centralized within the very heart of imperial power, in heavily guarded workshops deep inside the labyrinthine Great Palace of Constantinople. Here, under the direct and watchful eye of the emperor himself, the volatile ingredients were mixed. This was a state monopoly on a new kind of fear, ensuring that no single general or ambitious admiral could ever seize the formula for themselves. The knowledge itself was protected by a ritual of secrecy more binding than any lock. The exact recipe was never, under any circumstances, to be written down. It was transmitted orally from one trusted keeper to the next, likely within a single, tightly controlled family dynasty whose entire legacy and survival were tied to this one duty. Think of it, the most powerful weapon in the medieval world existed only in the memories of a handful of living people. This deliberate obscurity did more than prevent espionage, it cultivated an aura of the supernatural. To the Empire's enemies, this was not seen as advanced chemistry. It was perceived as a form of elemental magic, a clear sign that God favored the Christian emperor in Constantinople. The psychological impact was profound, making the Byzantine navy seem not just strong but invincible and divinely ordained. This monopoly became a powerful tool of diplomacy as well. Ambassadors from rival powers knew that challenging Byzantium at sea meant facing a force they could not comprehend or counter. The mere rumor of the Dromons being deployed was often enough to make kingdoms reconsider their demands or temper their aggression. The weapon's greatest power, therefore, was not just in its ability to burn ships, but in its ability to shape decisions and command respect without ever being used. It was the ultimate deterrent, and its guardians protected the mystery as fiercely as they protected the city. Yet the iconic Siphon was only one part of a much broader, more adaptable arsenal. The true genius of the Byzantine military was not just in creating a wonder weapon, but in weaving it into every thread of their defense, creating a layered system of fire that could meet any threat. On the decks of their Dromons, alongside the pressurized siphons, sailors kept stocks of ceramic grenades. These were not simple pots, but carefully crafted vessels, often with a thick, globular body designed to shatter on impact. Filled with a volatile liquid fire mixture and sealed with a cloth wick or a plug of quicklime-treated material, they became handheld terror. A sailor could light the fuse and hurl one onto an enemy deck before boarding, or a catapult on the city walls could lob them in a high arc into the midst of a besieging force on land. This transformed Greek fire from a purely naval weapon into a tool for infantry and siege defense, ensuring that whether the attack came from sea or land, the same horrifying flame would greet the enemy. Perhaps the most cunning deployment, however, was a tactic of pure psychological warfare. Byzantine sailors, known for their agility and daring, would sometimes rig small, suspended cauldrons of the mixture from the masts or yardarms of their own ships. They would then maneuver perilously close to an enemy vessel, using grappling hooks or long poles to transfer these burning pots onto the opponent's rigging. Once secured high above the deck, the cauldron could be tipped with a sharp pull of a rope, raining a torrent of unstoppable fire down onto the sailors below, engulfing the ship from the top down where it was most vulnerable. This method turned the very architecture of a wooden warship into its own funeral pyre. Each of these applications required different preparations, different delivery systems, and different kinds of bravery from the soldiers and sailors who used them. This versatility sent a clear message to any adversary. The Empire's secret weapon was not a single trick to be countered or avoided. It was a complete system, integrated into a combined arms approach that made their defenses unpredictable and omnipresent. An admiral could not simply stay out of siphon range and feel safe, for fire could fall from the sky or swing across on a chain. This tactical evolution shows a military thinking several steps ahead, ensuring their ultimate deterrent remained effective not just through terror but through relentless innovation. That sound was the first herald of doom. The siphons did not just project flame, they roared with the deafening breath of a dragon, a deep, guttural blast that could be heard across the water before the fire even appeared. This was no accident of engineering, it was the opening act of a carefully orchestrated theater of terror. The Byzantines understood that to win a battle, you first had to win the moment. The visual spectacle was engineered for maximum psychological impact. Against the dark backdrop of the sea at night, the jet of Greek fire would trace a brilliant, sinuous arc, a liquid comet that seemed to defy gravity before crashing onto its target. And then came the most unnerving sight of all. The flames did not sink or sputter out. They danced and skittered across the waves, creating a burning carpet that made the sea itself look like it was boiling from within. For sailors whose entire worldview was anchored in the natural order, this was a profound violation, a sign that the very elements had turned against them. The experience for those on the receiving end was one of utter helplessness. Standard naval drills were useless. The instinct to douse flames with seawater became a death sentence, amplifying the inferno. The thick, sticky substance clung to wood, sails, and skin, creating a horrific, inescapable end. In an age where omens and divine will were seen as direct causes of events, such a weapon could only be interpreted one way. Byzantine chroniclers and propagandists leaned into this perception with masterful skill. They did not frame Greek fire as a clever chemical advance, but as a celestial gift, a holy fire delivered by an angel directly to the Christian emperor. It was portrayed as the literal fire of heaven, wielded by God's chosen regent on earth to smite the unbelievers. This narrative was a powerful force multiplier. An enemy sailor, seeing a ship spew unquenchable flame, was not just facing a superior weapon, he was potentially facing divine wrath. The effect on morale was instantaneous and often decisive. Historical accounts describe entire enemy fleets, upon confirming the presence of the Dromons with their distinctive bronze siphons, breaking formation before a single shot was fired. The admiral's calculations shifted from how to win the engagement to how to save his fleet from annihilation. This psychological dominance created a strategic buffer for centuries, a zone of fear around Byzantine waters where the rumor of the liquid fire was as potent as its actual use. The true cost of Greek fire, therefore, was measured not just in burned timbers, but in shattered confidence and broken wills long before the battle had even begun. The roar of the dragon could be silenced by a single gust of wind. For all its terrifying reputation, Greek fire was a weapon of precise conditions, not a magic wand. Its greatest weakness was the very element it seemed to conquer, the weather. A strong crosswind could turn the pressurized jet into a deadly, swirling fog, engulfing the attacking Dromon in its own flame. In heavy rain, the mixture could fail to ignite at all, leaving the siphon operators pumping nothing but a sticky, useless liquid. On the open sea, high waves made the large, mounted siphons nearly impossible to aim with the accuracy required. The weapon that could dominate the narrow, sheltered Bosporus was far less reliable in the rolling expanse of the Mediterranean, limiting the empire's ability to take the offensive far from home. The danger was not only external. The substance itself was a nightmare to live with, storing barrels of volatile naphtha and quicklime in the wooden hulls of warships was an enormous risk. A single spark, a carelessly placed lantern, or even the heat of a summer sun could trigger a catastrophic explosion, sinking the ship that carried it without a single enemy in sight. The men who mixed and handled the brew worked in constant peril, knowing a minor error could ignite an inferno in the heart of the Imperial fleet. This inherent instability made Greek fire the ultimate defensive weapon, perfect for the controlled environment around Constantinople's harbors but cumbersome for long campaigns. The Byzantines understood these limitations perfectly. They were not relying on a mystical superweapon, but on a sophisticated and dangerous tool within a broader strategic framework. They used it to secure their lifelines and protect their capital, the irreplaceable heart of their civilization. For offensive power projection, they still relied on diplomacy, traditional naval maneuvers, and their formidable armies. This pragmatic acceptance of the weapon's flaws reveals the true sophistication of Byzantine strategy. They had mastered a terrifying technology, but they never became dependent on it alone. They knew its power was finite, its use conditional, and its secret their most fragile treasure. This very fragility would soon become the center of the mystery, as the empire that guarded the formula so fiercely began to lose its grip on the recipe itself. The fear inspired by Greek fire echoed far beyond the burning waves, preserved in the very records of the empires it defeated. We can hear its terrifying roar most clearly not in Byzantine victory proclamations, but in the stunned, frustrated accounts of their enemies. The great Arab historian al-Tabari, chronicling the early Islamic expansions, wrote with a palpable sense of awe and setback. He described the Byzantine weapon as the prepared fire that burns on water, a simple phrase that captures a profound technological shock. For the advancing Muslim forces, this was not just a military defeat, it was a confounding scientific riddle. Their own scholars and engineers, masters of mathematics and chemistry in their own right, studied captured equipment and interrogated prisoners, trying to piece together the secret. They had some success with incendiary weapons of their own, using naphtha in siege warfare, but they never fully replicated the pressurized, sea-borne fury of the true Greek fire. It remained a legendary obstacle, a symbol of Byzantine resilience that forced a strategic rethink, shifting the focus of conflict away from direct naval assaults on the capital for generations. This pattern of awe and terror repeated centuries later with a new power from the north. The Kievan Rus, fierce Viking-descended warriors and traders, launched a series of daring raids against Constantinople from their river routes. Their encounters with the liquid flame were so traumatic they became etched into the foundational chronicles of Slavic history. The primary chronicle, a vital record of early Rus history, describes the Byzantines not as soldiers with a clever weapon, but as wielders of a celestial force. They wrote that the Greeks had fire from heaven and that they launched it upon the ships of the Rus, burning them. This language is crucial. It frames the experience not as a loss to a superior navy, but as a confrontation with something divine or supernatural. The psychological impact of seeing their sturdy wooden longships consumed by a fire that danced on water was immeasurable. This defining experience did more than burn a fleet. It fundamentally reshaped the relationship between the Rus and the empire. Faced with a power they could not militarily overcome, the princes of Kiev turned increasingly toward diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. The path that would eventually lead Grand Prince Vladimir to accept Orthodox Christianity from Byzantium, rather than from rival powers, was paved in part by the respect and fear instilled by that heavenly fire. Conquest seemed impossible, but alliance offered immense prestige and wealth. In this way, the secret weapon achieved its highest purpose. It did not just destroy enemies, it transformed potential conquerors into partners, using terror to build a lasting sphere of influence that was cultural and religious as much as it was political. But a secret guarded too closely can be forgotten by its own keepers. The very system of oral transmission and imperial monopoly that protected Greek fire for centuries became its greatest vulnerability. As the Byzantine Empire entered a long, slow decline after the 12th century, its centralized power began to crack. Provincial rebellions, economic strain, and a shrinking territory meant the once mighty bureaucracy that managed the weapons production started to fray. The specialized workshops in the Great Palace, requiring steady funding and a secure chain of command, likely fell into disrepair or neglect. The knowledge of how to properly refine the crude naphtha, to mix the precise ratios of thickeners and reactive agents to create a stable, storable brew, was not written in any manual. It lived in the hands and memories of a select few. If that chain was broken, if a master chemist passed his knowledge to an apprentice who then perished in a plague or a battle before teaching another, a piece of the puzzle vanished forever. The complex bronze siphons, marvels of metallurgy and engineering, required craftsmen who understood their precise construction and maintenance. As the empire's resources dwindled, such niche expertise became a luxury it could no longer consistently afford. By the time the soldiers of the Fourth Crusade, fellow Christians turned renegade, breached the walls of Constantinople in the year 1204, Greek fire was likely already a relic. The great Dromons were gone, and the legendary flame that had defended the city for over 500 years did not appear in the desperate final battles. The secret had evaporated not with a bang, but with a slow, silent fade into history. Yet the idea of it proved impossible to extinguish. Its legacy lived on powerfully in two forms: fear and inspiration. For enemies and allies alike, the memory of the liquid flame became a benchmark for technological terror, a story passed down of an ancient power so great it could command the sea itself. This folklore seeped into the cultures around the Mediterranean and beyond, appearing in tales as the ultimate symbol of lost wisdom, a reminder that the ancients possessed secrets modern people could not reclaim. Simultaneously, it served as a direct inspiration for later inventors. For centuries, alchemists and military engineers in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe sought to rediscover or reinvent the Byzantine miracle, experimenting with incendiary mixtures that led to advances in gunpowder-based weapons. The ghost of Greek fire, a whisper of chemical supremacy, continued to shape the very evolution of warfare, proving that some ideas are so potent they outlive even the empires that created them. The legend of Greek fire raises a profound question for modern minds. How do you reconstruct a secret that was deliberately never written down? The answer lies in a fascinating marriage of history and chemistry, where scholars have become detectives, piecing together clues from fragments of the past. They begin with the scattered, often frustratingly vague descriptions left in chronicles, military manuals, and even the accounts of enemies who witnessed its effects. A Byzantine text might mention a substance that is drawn from the earth and burns on water. An Arab observer could note the thick, black smoke it produced. These are not recipes, but they are vital pieces of a chemical puzzle. The next step is understanding the material world of the empire. What raw ingredients were readily available in the Byzantine sphere? Historians map the trade routes for pine resin from Greece, identify the surface oil seeps around the Black Sea, and study the mining of sulfur and saltpeter. They cross-reference this with the known properties of these substances, how they behave when mixed, how they burn, and how they react with water. This is not guesswork, it is a process of elimination, building a list of plausible components that match both the historical record and the laws of physics. The final and most dramatic phase is experimental archaeology. Research teams, often collaborations between historians and chemists, don protective gear and mix their own versions based on the most credible theories. They combine crude oil with pine resin to create a sticky gel. They add powdered quicklime to observe the violent, heat-producing reaction with water. They test these mixtures, projecting them with reconstructed pumps or hurling them in clay pots to see if they will ignite on impact and cling to a surface. One notable experiment, conducted by a team for a historical documentary, created a substance that burned fiercely on seawater for over 20 seconds, a terrifyingly effective result that matched many ancient descriptions. These modern recreations can never be called the true formula, but they serve a powerful purpose. They move the conversation beyond myth and magic, grounding the legend in tangible, combustible reality. They demonstrate conclusively that Greek fire was not a supernatural gift, but a brilliant, brutal application of chemical principles that were understood, at least practically, over 1,000 years ago. This forensic approach does more than solve a historical mystery. It forces us to reconsider the medieval world. It reveals an era not of darkness and superstition, but of sophisticated problem-solving and advanced engineering, where emperors funded laboratories and chemists held the fate of cities in their hands. The loss of the secret was a tragedy for Byzantine power, but the enduring quest to understand it is a testament to human ingenuity, both then and now. The true power of Greek fire was not confined to the hulls of burning ships. It seeped into the very soul of the empire, transforming from a weapon of war into a potent symbol of divine favor and imperial might. Within the sacred spaces of Byzantine churches and the pages of illuminated manuscripts, artists depicted the liquid flame not as a chemical tool, but as a celestial weapon. In mosaics and icons, it was often shown streaming from the hands of angels or saints, a visual declaration that God himself armed the emperor in Constantinople. This was statecraft in pigment and stone, a deliberate message to every citizen and foreign envoy that the empire's survival was a matter of heavenly destiny, not just military engineering. The emperors understood the theater of power. Historical accounts suggest they incorporated displays of this fearsome technology into grand court ceremonies, especially when receiving ambassadors from rival states. Imagine the scene in the Great Hall of the Magnaura Palace. Dignitaries from Kiev, Baghdad, or Rome would be led before the throne, surrounded by the glittering wealth of the empire. Then, at a signal, servants would bring forth a small, controlled demonstration. Perhaps they would ignite a basin of water, showing the flames dancing impossibly upon the liquid, or project a brief, roaring jet into a stone trough. This was a masterstroke of psychological diplomacy. It was a safe, non-threatening exhibition that carried a very clear and threatening subtext. The message was unmistakable. You have seen a mere glimpse of what guards our seas. Cross us and you will face the full, unrestrained fury of heaven's fire. This transformed Greek fire from a rumor into a verified, visceral reality for the empire's rivals, making treaties seem far more appealing than invasion. Beyond the palace walls, the legend took on a life of its own, traveling on the tongues of traders, refugees, and soldiers. In Western European chronicles, it was described with a mix of awe and suspicion, a marvel of almost diabolical cleverness that set the Byzantines apart as devious and mysteriously powerful. In Islamic scholarly circles, it was recorded as a formidable scientific achievement to be studied and, if possible, countered. The weapon even found its way into epic poetry and romantic tales, becoming a metaphor for any irresistible secret force, a symbol of the ancient world's lost and terrifying wisdom. Long after the last bronze siphon was dismantled for scrap, the idea of Greek fire continued to burn in the human imagination. It became less a historical weapon and more a story we tell about ingenuity, fear, and the enduring power of a secret that can hold the world at bay. A weapon's legacy is measured in more than burned ships. By securing the sea lanes for over 500 years, Greek fire performed a quiet, world-altering miracle. It bought time. For the embattled Byzantine Empire, that time was everything. It transformed a fortress under siege into a stable, enduring civilization that served as a critical dam, holding back a tide of conquest and preserving a river of knowledge that would one day feed the Renaissance. Imagine the map of the 7th and 8th centuries without that liquid flame. Constantinople likely falls to the first great Arab siege. The Eastern Roman Empire collapses centuries earlier than it did. The heart of Orthodox Christianity is extinguished, and the political and religious geography of Europe and the Near East is rewritten overnight. But because the Dromons held the line, none of that happened. The empire endured as a Christian bulwark, a defiant island in a rising sea of Islamic caliphates. This was not a victory of conversion or conquest, but of stubborn, brilliant survival, and that survival had cascading effects no admiral could have foreseen. Within the safety of those guarded walls, a precious cargo was protected, not of gold, but of parchment and ideas. Byzantine monasteries and imperial libraries became the vaults for a vast inheritance, the original texts of ancient Greek philosophers, Roman historians, and early Christian theologians. While Western Europe fragmented and many classical works were lost or forgotten in the Latin West, Byzantine scribes meticulously copied and preserved Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen. Scholars debated their meanings, wrote commentaries, and kept the flame of rational inquiry alive. This was not a passive act of storage. It was an active, continuous engagement with the intellectual foundation of Western thought. The empire's stability, guaranteed in part by its naval supremacy, created the peaceful conditions necessary for this scholarly tradition to flourish for generations. When this preserved knowledge finally began to trickle back into Western Europe through trade contacts in Italy and the efforts of translators, it ignited an intellectual revolution. The very Renaissance, with its rediscovery of classical humanism and science, was built in part upon manuscripts that had been kept safe for a millennium in Constantinople, a city that Greek fire helped keep standing. The strategic shockwave extended far beyond the empire's own libraries. Faced with an impregnable naval fortress at the Bosporus, the expanding Arab caliphates made a monumental strategic pivot. The direct eastern route into the heart of Europe was sealed, so they turned their immense energy and military might westward, channeling expansion through the softer underbelly of North Africa. This redirection of historical force had staggering consequences. It led to the Islamic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, creating the sophisticated civilization of Al-Andalus in Spain, a center of learning, art, and coexistence that would profoundly influence medieval Europe. It intensified cultural and economic exchanges across the Mediterranean, from Sicily to the coasts of France, and it set the stage for centuries of conflict and exchange between Christian and Muslim powers, from the Crusades to the Reconquista, fundamentally shaping the identities of modern European nations. None of this was planned by the Byzantine chemists, of course. They were simply trying to save their city, but by creating an obstacle so absolute it could not be overcome, they inadvertently became river guides for history, diverting the flow of armies, ideas, and entire cultures onto a different course. The existence of that one secret weapon did not just win battles, it quietly dictated where civilizations would clash, trade, and ultimately learn from one another for the next 1,000 years. Fire was already an ancient and terrifying tool of war long before the Byzantines. For millennia, armies had hurled flaming arrows into wooden fortifications, lobbed clay pots filled with burning pitch from catapults, and even used rudimentary chemical mixtures. The Spartans were said to have used a combination of sulfur, pitch, and charcoal to create choking, toxic fumes during sieges. These were weapons of terror and destruction, but they operated on a simple principle: set something flammable on fire and throw it at the enemy. They were combustibles, not unlike a giant, militarized campfire. A burning arrow could ignite a thatched roof or a sail, but a bucket of water or a swift smothering could usually put it out. A pot of burning pitch would shatter and spread a fire, but it was a single, momentary event, a splash of flame rather than a sustained onslaught. This was the state of incendiary warfare for centuries, powerful but limited, a tool for creating chaos rather than commanding an entire battlefield. This context is what makes the Byzantine breakthrough so extraordinary. Greek fire was not just another way to start a fire, it was a fundamental reinvention of what fire could do in a fight. The key differences were in its form and its function. First, it was a liquid, a thick, sticky brew that could be projected. This was not a solid object set alight. It was a flowing, clinging substance that behaved almost like a living thing, seeking out cracks and contours on its target. Second, and most famously, it burned on water. This single property transformed the entire theater of naval warfare. Before, the sea was a refuge from flame, a place where a burning ship could be abandoned. Greek fire made the water itself an extension of the inferno, turning the sailor's natural escape route into a deadly trap. Third, and perhaps most critically from an engineering standpoint, was its delivery. The Byzantines did not throw it, they pumped it. The pressurized siphon system allowed for a continuous, adjustable stream of flame, like a hose of liquid fire that could be swept across decks or aimed with precision at a ship's waterline. This turned it from a weapon of chance into a weapon of controlled, directed annihilation. It created a zone of absolute denial, a burning moat on the waves that no ship could cross. We see fascinating parallels in other parts of the ancient world, which only highlight the Byzantine synthesis. In China, for centuries, military manuals described the use of fierce fire oil, a petroleum-based incendiary used in naval battles. Accounts tell of spraying it from bellows or tubes to set enemy ships ablaze. The base ingredient and the terrifying effect were strikingly similar. Yet, historians note a crucial distinction. The Chinese versions, while advanced, often relied on a one-shot projection or a simpler pumping mechanism. The Byzantine system, with its complex bronze siphons, pumps, and preheating apparatus, represented a more refined and sustained mechanical application. It was this marriage of a devastating chemical formula with a reliable, repeatable mechanical delivery system that set Greek fire apart. The Byzantines did not just have a better recipe, they built a machine for it. They integrated the weapon into the very architecture of their warships, making the Dromon and the fire a single, unified entity. This was systems thinking applied to warfare, a holistic approach where the chemist, the metallurgist, the shipwright, and the sailor all played a part in creating a single, overwhelming effect. Comparing it to the flaming arrows and pitch pots of old is like comparing a hand-cranked musket to a rapid-fire cannon. The principle of projectile and explosion might be related, but the scale, control, and psychological impact belong to different ages of warfare. The formula was powerless without the hands that mixed it and the minds that understood its fury. While emperors took the credit and admirals gave the orders, the true lifeblood of Greek fire flowed through a hidden class of artisans, sworn to a silence as deep as the sea. These were the chemists who distilled the naphtha in secret workshops, the metallurgists who cast the roaring bronze siphons, and the shipwrights who designed the dromons to withstand the weapon's violent recoil. They likely belonged to specialized imperial guilds, bound by sacred oaths and the very real threat of severe punishment, their entire professional existence dedicated to maintaining a monopoly on terror. Their workspace was a unique kind of hell, a dangerous intersection of alchemy and warfare. A chemist might spend his morning carefully heating a batch of the volatile mixture in a fortified arsenal on land, only to be summoned to the harbor by afternoon to oversee its transfer onto a warship. There, on the rocking deck of a dromon, he would work alongside the siphon operators, men who had to be part engineer, part artilleryman. They had to judge the viscosity of the day's batch, understand the pressure needed in the pumps, and know the precise moment to apply the ignition source, all while the ship pitched on the waves and enemy arrows flew. They worked without thermometers, pressure gauges, or any of our modern instruments. Their tools were experience, observation, and a deeply ingrained, practical wisdom passed from master to apprentice. They understood that pine resin from a northern forest thickened the mixture differently than resin from the south. They knew how the bronze of the siphon expanded with heat and how much pressure the seals could bear before failing catastrophically. A single mistake in their calculations could mean an explosion in the ship's hold, turning the Empire's greatest weapon into its own funeral pyre. Theirs was a life of constant, calculated risk, where genius was measured not in academic papers, but in the survival of the city with each successful deployment. We do not know their names, no chronicles sing their praises, no mosaics depict their labor. They are the anonymous architects of a miracle, the human element in a story often told through emperors and flames. Their legacy is the centuries of peace their skill purchased, the civilization their silent vigilance preserved. They remind us that history's most dramatic turning points are frequently powered not by the famous figures in the spotlight, but by the quiet, applied ingenuity of specialists working in the shadows, whose greatest achievement was a secret they carried to their graves. Hollywood loves a spectacle, but it often rewrites the rules of history for dramatic effect. When Greek fire appears on screen, it is frequently transformed into something more fantastical, a neon green blaze that explodes with the force of modern artillery. In the popular imagination, it becomes a weapon carried by every foot soldier, a ubiquitous tool of destruction that defined every Byzantine battlefield. This cinematic version makes for thrilling visuals, but it obscures the far more impressive reality. The true nature of Greek fire was one of precision and control, not chaotic spectacle. Its color, based on the chemistry of burning petroleum and pine resin, was almost certainly a bright, roaring orange or deep yellow, the color of a serious industrial fire, not an otherworldly emerald glow. It did not explode in the sense we think of with gunpowder. There was no concussive blast wave shattering ships. Instead, its horror was in its persistence, a liquid that ignited and then spread, clinging and burning with a terrifying tenacity that water could not stop. This distinction is vital. An explosive is a one-time event, but Greek fire was a continuing catastrophe, a fire you could not outrun or drown. Furthermore, it was not a weapon for the common soldier. It was a highly specialized naval instrument, a complex system reserved for the Dromons and, in its grenade form, for specific siege scenarios. The Byzantine military did not waste this precious, volatile, and difficult-to-manufacture substance on minor skirmishes. Its deployment was a strategic decision, saved for critical moments where controlling the sea was synonymous with saving the empire. The Siphon operators were not rank-and-file infantrymen. They were technical experts, the elite pilots of the ancient world's most fearsome weapon. Correcting these popular myths does not diminish the achievement, it elevates it. The truth reveals a civilization that mastered not just a chemical formula, but the entire logistical and tactical framework to use it effectively. This was not a magic trick stumbled upon by accident. It was the result of sustained investment, rigorous training, and systematic application. The disciplined management of Greek fire, from its secret production to its calculated use, showcases a level of military scientific organization that rivals modern efforts. The fiction gives us a cartoonish superweapon, but the reality gives us a glimpse into the sophisticated, engineering-minded culture that built and maintained an empire for 1,000 years. The disciplined truth, in the end, is far more remarkable than any magical flame. This secret weapon possessed a power that extended far beyond the reach of its flames. In the high-stakes game of medieval diplomacy, the mere knowledge that Greek fire existed became the Byzantine Empire's ultimate bargaining chip. An emperor did not need to mobilize his fleet to change the course of international relations. He simply needed the rumor of it to reach the right ears. This created a unique form of leverage where the threat of annihilation could secure peace, open trade routes, and forge alliances without a single drop of the precious mixture ever being expended. The psychological dread it inspired was a currency more valuable than gold in the imperial treasury. When envoys from powerful rivals like the Bulgars or the Rus arrived in Constantinople, their negotiations were conducted under a silent, unspoken shadow. They had come to a city protected not just by walls, but by a force that defied nature itself. The Byzantine emperor could afford to be patient, to make demands, or to offer terms that heavily favored his empire, all while knowing his counterpart was weighing every word against the potential cost of a naval conflict they could not win. This was statecraft refined to a psychological art, where the most powerful weapon was the one that made the enemy's imagination do the work. To make that threat tangible, emperors would occasionally stage carefully controlled demonstrations for visiting dignitaries. Imagine an ambassador from a rival kingdom being escorted to a secluded courtyard within the great palace. Before him, servants would place a large basin of water. With a theatrical flourish, a technician would project a short, roaring jet of the liquid fire across its surface. The flames would dance and skitter, impossible and terrifying, before being safely contained and extinguished. The message was delivered with chilling clarity. You have now seen with your own eyes what guards our seas. This was not an act of war, but a masterclass in deterrence. The ambassador would return home with a first-hand report, transforming abstract fear into a concrete, verified reality for his king or caliph. The strategic calculation for any rival ruler shifted dramatically. Launching a fleet against Constantinople was no longer a risky military venture, it was a potential suicide mission. This allowed the empire to secure its borders through intimidation, offering protection to merchant cities along the Black Sea or Aegean coast in exchange for loyalty and favorable trade terms. They could demand higher tariffs, secure exclusive rights to grain shipments, or force political concessions, all under the implicit understanding of what happened to those who defied the will of the emperor. In this way, Greek fire evolved from a tactical naval tool into the cornerstone of a grand strategic doctrine. It proved a timeless geopolitical truth that a reputation for overwhelming, mysterious force can shape the world just as decisively as the force itself. The empire's greatest victories were sometimes won not on the waves, but in the quiet rooms where treaties were signed, under the unseen pressure of a flame that never had to leave its siphons. The legacy of Greek fire is not written only in victories, but also in a lingering, unsettling smoke. From our modern vantage point, this miraculous shield appears in a more complex light, as a weapon that inflicted a particularly dreadful form of suffering. For the sailors who faced it, the end was not a swift clash of steel, but an inescapable, agonizing conflagration. The very properties that made it so effective, its adhesion and its defiance of water, ensured a horrific fate for those caught in its path, a reality that challenges our contemporary views on what constitutes humane conduct in war. Beyond the immediate human cost, its repeated use over centuries in the confined waters of the Bosporus and Golden Horn must have left a lasting environmental mark. The residue of burning petroleum, pine tar, and sulfur would have sunk into the seabed, poisoning marine life and potentially contaminating the very fishing grounds and harbors the empire relied upon for sustenance. The Byzantines, viewing their survival as a divine mandate, likely saw no ethical dilemma in using every tool at their disposal. To them, it was the fire of heaven wielded against the enemies of God and empire, a clear-cut case of righteous necessity. For us, however, the story compels a deeper reflection. It connects directly to ongoing debates about the morality of certain weapons, from chemical agents to incendiary munitions, and the enduring question of whether some technological advantages come with a moral burden too heavy to bear. The possession of a decisive, game-changing technology creates a profound responsibility. The Byzantine emperors and their chemists held in their hands not just a secret, but the power to inflict a specific kind of terror that bypassed all contemporary notions of chivalry or fair combat. Their choice to use it was rooted in a stark calculus. The survival of their civilization justified any means. This ancient dilemma echoes powerfully today as nations grapple with the ethics of autonomous drones, cyber warfare, and other asymmetric tools that distance the wielder from the consequences. Greek fire forces us to ask, where is the line between legitimate defense and unconscionable destruction? Can the desperate need to preserve a culture, a religion, a repository of knowledge ever validate the use of a weapon designed to cause such profound suffering? There are no simple answers, only the sobering recognition that the human drive to innovate for protection, is eternally shadowed by our capacity to engineer new forms of horror. The true cost of the Empire's survival, therefore, must be measured not just in the centuries of peace it bought, but in the terrible price paid by those who met the dragon's breath upon the waves. The city's defense was a masterpiece of layered thinking. Greek fire did not stand alone. It was the flaming moat that complemented the greatest stone fortress ever built, the Theodosian walls. On land, Constantinople was encircled by a monumental barrier of limestone and brick, a triple-layered labyrinth of walls, towers, and deep ditches that stood over 30 feet high in places. For centuries, this architecture had turned back armies, making a direct assault on the landward side a near-suicidal prospect, so any savvy conqueror would look to the sea, to the city's seemingly vulnerable harbors. That is where the synergy became absolute. The Byzantines engineered their naval defense to create the same sense of hopeless impossibility on the water. The Dromons with their siphons did not just patrol, they constructed a dynamic, moving wall of flame. An enemy fleet, therefore, faced a brutal choice: dash themselves against the immovable stone on land, or brave the liquid, consuming fire on the sea. There was no soft spot, no undefended flank. This integration was intentional and brilliant. The geography of Constantinople itself played a crucial role, especially the narrow, sheltered inlet known as the Golden Horn. This was not open ocean, it was a controlled corridor. An attacking fleet entering these confined waters would find its maneuverability severely limited. Its ships funneled into a predictable path, right into the optimal range of the waiting Siphon batteries. The Golden Horn became a fatal funnel where the terrifying physics of Greek fire could be deployed with maximum efficiency. This holistic vision, blending natural geography, immovable architecture, and terrifying technology, represents a pinnacle of defensive strategy. It forced any adversary to solve two completely different, yet equally devastating puzzles simultaneously. How do you scale walls that repelled the might of Persia? And how do you cross a sea that could be set ablaze at a moment's notice? For over 800 years, no enemy ever found a complete answer. The city's legendary impregnability was not due to a single wonder, but to a system, a seamless weave of stone, water, chemistry, and sheer cunning that made Constantinople not just a city, but an idea, a fortress so perfectly conceived it seemed to defy the very logic of conquest. The secret was far too valuable to remain unchallenged. For every empire that trembled at the sight of the liquid flame, there were brilliant minds determined to steal, copy, or counter it. This sparked a centuries-long shadow war, not of armies clashing on fields, but of chemists in hidden workshops and spies whispering in harbors, a medieval arms race centered on a single, volatile formula. The Arab caliphates, having felt the weapon sting directly, led the charge in this technological espionage. Their own scholars were masters of alchemy and distillation, and they had ample access to the same crude naphtha from Mesopotamian oil seeps. Through relentless experimentation, they achieved significant successes, developing powerful incendiary weapons of their own, often called naft in Arabic texts. These mixtures could be terrifyingly effective in siege warfare, launched in pots from catapults to burn fortifications. Yet, historians note a consistent gap in the records. While they could replicate the burning substance, they seemingly never mastered the Byzantine delivery system, the complex bronze pumps, the pressurized siphons, and the mechanics of projecting a sustained, liquid jet across water. They could create the fire, but not the dragon's breath. This suggests the true secret lay not just in the recipe, but in the precision engineering required to weaponize it, a mechanical art guarded as closely as the chemistry itself. Interrogation was a direct, brutal line of attack. A captured siphon operator was a prize beyond gold for any adversary. These men, however, were likely protected by a Byzantine strategy of compartmentalization. The empire understood that people, not parchments, were the weakest link, so they broke the process into isolated pieces. The chemist who distilled the naphtha in a palace workshop might never meet the metallurgist who cast the siphon. The sailor who operated the pump mechanism on a Dromon might know only how to maintain his specific apparatus, not the exact proportions of the brew in its tanks. He could describe the roar and the flame, but not recreate the substance from scratch. This meant that even if an enemy captured a skilled operator, the information they could extract was fragmented, a single piece of a puzzle whose full picture was known only to a select few at the very top of the Imperial administration. This system of secrecy turned human knowledge into a fortress, with each person guarding only one key to a gate that required many to open. The desperation to obtain the secret reached a fever pitch with the soldiers of the Fourth Crusade. When these Western European knights, allied with the shrewd merchants of Venice, breached the walls of Constantinople in 1204, they ransacked the city not just for relics and gold, but for the ultimate military secret. The Venetians, as a naval power, understood its value more than anyone. Their entire livelihood depended on controlling the sea, and the legend of a weapon that could make a fleet invincible was an irresistible lure. Contemporary accounts suggest they scoured the imperial arsenals and palaces, searching for manuals, interrogating craftsmen, and seizing any strange apparatus they could find. Yet they came away empty-handed. By this late date, the active, institutional knowledge of Greek fire had likely already faded within the decaying empire. The workshops were silent, the specialist guilds dissolved. The Crusaders found echoes and memories, but not the living secret. This failure is one of history's great ironies. The very event that finally crippled the Byzantine Empire also proved that its most legendary defense had already evaporated, leaving behind only its fearsome reputation. This relentless, multi-front effort at technological theft and replication tells us more than any victory chronicle ever could. It underscores the immense, tangible value placed on this single innovation by every major power of the medieval world. The sustained investment in reverse engineering and espionage reveals a period often mischaracterized as technologically stagnant. In truth, it was an era of fierce and sophisticated innovation, where kingdoms competed not just in manpower but in laboratory breakthroughs. The silent war over Greek fire was a precursor to modern industrial and military secrecy, a clear demonstration that knowledge, when applied to power, becomes the most contested resource of all. Every failed replication, every intercepted spy, and every fruitless interrogation served to heighten the weapon's mythical status, proving that sometimes the best way to protect a secret is to make the world believe it is simply impossible to copy. The complete disappearance of Greek fire whispers of a deeper fragility than mere neglect. We accept the secret faded, but the precise mechanics of that loss are a puzzle in themselves. Was it a single, catastrophic event? Imagine a scenario where the primary imperial workshop, housed within the Great Palace, suffered a devastating accident. A miscalculation in mixing a large batch, a stray spark in a storage arsenal. Such an event could have wiped out not just a building, but the entire living lineage of master chemists and their apprentices in one fiery instant. This would have severed the chain of oral transmission irrevocably, leaving behind charred ruins and a leadership that knew the weapon existed, but had no one left who understood how to make it work. Political turmoil offers another plausible path to oblivion. The Byzantine court was infamous for its intrigues and purges. An emperor, paranoid about a rival faction or a disloyal general, might have viewed the specialized guilds that controlled the fire as a threat. If he ordered the arrest or removal of these key individuals to consolidate his own power, he could have inadvertently destroyed the very expertise that guaranteed that power. The knowledge would have died with the people he silenced, a victim of internal suspicion rather than external siege. Then there is the slow, silent killer of logistical decay. The secret depended on a steady flow of specific raw materials. High-quality naphtha likely came from controlled seeps in the Crimean region. If those territories were lost to invaders or rebellious governors, the empire might have been cut off from the purest base ingredient. Substitutes could be found, but they might not behave the same way in the precise formula, leading to failed batches, unreliable ignition, and a gradual loss of confidence in the weapon itself. The technology would have degraded not with a bang, but with a sputter, as each new batch proved slightly less potent than the last. Finally, we must consider the march of progress. By the 13th and 14th centuries, a new technological paradigm was emerging from the east: gunpowder. Early cannons and explosive weapons, while crude, represented a different kind of terror, one based on concussive force rather than clinging flame. For a shrinking, cash-strapped empire, the decision of where to invest limited resources would have been stark. Do you fund the aging, temperamental system of siphons and secret oils, or do you invest in the new, promising technology of artillery? The choice, made over decades, would have slowly starved the Greek fire program of craftsmen, funding, and imperial attention until it was simply a memory. The utter completeness of the loss tells us the secret was never a scroll in a library. It was a living ecosystem of hands, minds, and materials. Its disappearance is a profound cautionary tale about the delicate nature of advanced knowledge, reminding us that the greatest inventions of any age are not just ideas, but traditions, and traditions can be extinguished far more easily than a fire on water. The flames on the water were seen not as chemistry, but as a covenant. In the mind of the Byzantine Empire, their miraculous survival against impossible odds could only be the work of divine favor, and Greek fire was its most tangible, terrifying proof. This was not merely a military strategy, it was a theological imperative. The state meticulously wove the narrative of their celestial defense into the very fabric of daily life, transforming a technological advantage into a sacred legend. Icons created in the centuries following the great sieges often depicted the Virgin Mary, the city's beloved protectress, standing guard over the walls of Constantinople. Sometimes in these sacred images, the heavenly fire that repelled the fleets was shown emanating from her hands or the hands of attendant angels, a visual sermon declaring that God fought for the Queen of Cities. This imagery sent a powerful message to every citizen, from the emperor to the humblest sailor. Their struggle was not for land or power alone, but for the preservation of God's chosen kingdom on earth. Hymns sung in the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia reinforced this idea, celebrating deliverance from the invaders and giving thanks for the holy fire that shielded the faithful. A victory was never just a tactical achievement. It was a feast day, a religious celebration attributed to the direct intervention of the Theotokos, the Mother of God. The weapon itself, in this context, became something more than a tool. It took on the aura of a blessed instrument, a fiery sword wielded by divine mandate. Its use was therefore sanctified, a righteous act in a perpetual spiritual war. This fusion of technology and faith created an incredibly resilient state ideology. It meant that defending Constantinople was not a matter of political loyalty, but a sacred duty for every Christian within its walls. The soldier on the rampart and the chemist in the arsenal could both believe they were participating in a holy crusade, their labors contributing to a divine plan. This religious framing was a masterstroke of morale and unity. In times of hardship or doubt, the memory of the heaven-sent flame offered a profound sense of hope and purpose. It explained their endurance in a way that mere military prowess could not, fostering a collective identity rooted in resilience and divine election. The empire was not just surviving, it was fulfilling a cosmic role, and Greek fire was the spectacular sign of that covenant. This belief system turned the city into a living icon, its survival a continuous miracle, and its secret weapon a sacred mystery guarded by God and emperor alike. Yet the seafloor holds whispers of fire in the cold, silent dark. Unlike a shattered sword or a rusted helmet, a chemical weapon dissolves into history, leaving behind ghosts of evidence that archaeologists must learn to read. Their search is not for the flame itself, but for its shadow, the physical imprint it left on the world. They sift through harbor sediments near ancient Byzantine docks, analyzing layers of silt for chemical anomalies, traces of petroleum or unusual concentrations of elements that might signal centuries of fiery discharges into the water. They study the wrecks of warships not for intact siphons, but for subtle modifications to the hull structure, unusual bronze fittings, reinforced decks, or the telltale placement of a large, fixed iron shield at the prow that could have protected a siphon operator. Each detail is a potential clue in a material detective story where the culprit has long since evaporated. The most promising traces often come in the form of pottery. Historians know from manuals that Greek fire was deployed in handheld projectiles, ceramic grenades. So archaeologists examine every thick-walled, globular pot recovered from Byzantine contexts with particular interest. Its shape would need to be sturdy enough to survive being hurled, yet designed to shatter on impact for maximum effect. A thrilling moment in this search came in 2005, with the discovery of an 11th century Byzantine merchant ship at the bottom of the Sea of Marmara. Among its cargo were several unusual, coarse clay vessels with remarkably thick walls. While they were not weapons themselves, this was a civilian trader. Their design immediately sparked intense curiosity. Were these the kind of pots made by the same workshops that produced military grenades? Did their form offer a blueprint for the containers that carried the liquid terror? Such a find illustrates the indirect path of this investigation. A smoking bronze siphon may never be lifted from the deep, but each artifact like this adds a crucial piece to the behavioral puzzle. It shows a material culture adapted for a specific, violent purpose. This painstaking work is a testament to the profound challenges of material history, where the most revolutionary technologies can be the most ephemeral. It also keeps alive a tantalizing possibility that the final, definitive physical proof of Greek fire still rests in the sediment, perhaps encrusted on the timbers of an Imperial Dromon that never made it home, waiting for the right stroke of a trowel or the scan of a submersible to finally tell its story. The last documented roar of the dragon was a cry of civil war. In the early 13th century, as the empire fractured into rival states following the catastrophic Fourth Crusade, Greek fire made its final, grim appearance in the historical record, not against a foreign fleet, but in clashes between Byzantine factions vying for the shattered throne. This was the weapon's tragic irony. The ultimate shield of the civilization was now turned inward, its flames illuminating a realm consuming itself. The very conditions that had birthed and sustained the secret were vanishing. The empire was no longer a sprawling power with secure provinces and deep resources. It had shrunk to a patchwork of territories, with Constantinople itself impoverished and depopulated. The intricate state-funded infrastructure, the guarded workshops, the specialized supply chains for naphtha and resin, all of it depended on a stable, wealthy, and centralized authority. That authority was gone. Without the immense imperial treasury and bureaucracy to maintain it, the system began to crumble from within. The master chemists and metallurgists, their guilds dissolved and their patronage lost, found no new apprentices in a world of chaos and poverty. Their irreplaceable knowledge died with them, not in a single moment, but in a slow, silent exodus of expertise. At the same time, a new thunder was echoing from the east. The technology of gunpowder, gradually migrating from China through the Islamic world, was beginning to reach the Mediterranean. Early cannons, known as bombards, were crude and unpredictable, but they represented a fundamental shift. They offered a terrifying new form of psychological impact, the deafening blast and the stone-shattering projectile. and they could strike from distances far beyond the reach of any siphon. For the remnants of the Byzantine state, making agonizing choices about where to allocate their last coins, the calculus was clear: investing in the new technology of artillery, which could be learned from foreign engineers and did not rely on a lost chemical recipe, was a more practical path than trying to resurrect the ancient, decaying system of liquid fire. The era did not end with a dramatic naval battle where the last Dromon was sunk. It ended with a quiet, final realization in some forgotten arsenal. The last sealed container of the ancient mixture had long since dried up or spoiled. The last siphon operator had passed, and no one living remembered the exact sound of the pumps or the feel of the correct viscosity. What was once the Empire's most guarded reality became, first, a half-remembered rumor among old soldiers, then a story told to children, and finally, a legend etched into the pages of history books. The secret did not vanish in a blaze of glory. It simply evaporated like the last wisp of smoke from a flame that had guarded a civilization for centuries. But what lingers after the last flame sputters out is not just the memory of terror. The story of Greek fire is more than a tale of ancient warfare. It is a profound lesson in the fragile nature of knowledge itself. For over 5 centuries, this single formula was the ultimate secret, a treasure more closely guarded than any crown jewel. Its power did not come from the fire alone, but from the silence that surrounded it, a silence so complete that when the empire finally fell, the secret vanished without a trace. We are left with echoes, a ghost of an idea that once redirected the flow of history. This is the ultimate cautionary tale for any civilization, a reminder that our greatest innovations are not just the things we build, but the traditions of knowing how to build them. Those traditions are living things passed from hand to hand and mind to mind, and they can be extinguished far more easily than a fire on water. The chemists of Constantinople understood the elements, but they could not write a manual for resilience. Their genius was both their salvation and their eventual undoing, a paradox that echoes through the ages. Today, we create and store knowledge on an unimaginable scale, in digital clouds and vast libraries. Yet the story of Greek fire asks us a quiet, unsettling question: how much of what we know is truly permanent? What crucial understanding, what delicate art or complex process, depends not on a file saved to a server, but on the experience of a handful of people? The loss of this ancient weapon forces us to look at our own world with new eyes, to see the invisible threads of expertise that hold our modern miracles together. It teaches us that innovation is not a one-time event, but a continuous chain, and every link in that chain is precious. The legacy of the liquid flame, therefore, is not found in a reconstructed recipe, but in this deeper understanding, a respect for the human element behind every leap forward. As we reflect on this lost marvel of the ancient world, we might also consider the pivotal innovations of our own time, the technologies that seem to define our era. Which of these, centuries from now, will seem just as mysterious, just as legendary, and just as utterly dependent on the fragile, brilliant minds that conceived them? If this journey into the heart of a Byzantine mystery has captivated you, there are countless other enigmas just like it, waiting in the shadows of our past. Your curiosity is what brings these lost stories back to life. If this exploration shed new light for you, showing that button below the video is a fantastic way to let us know and helps others discover this hidden history. Consider subscribing to join our community, because we are just getting started. Every week, we venture down another forgotten path, piecing together the puzzles of ancient innovation, vanished cultures, and secrets that time almost erased. Your participation turns this from a monologue into a conversation. So tell us, what other lost technologies or forgotten wonders do you believe secretly shaped our world? Was it the precise celestial navigation of the Polynesians, the incredible acoustic engineering of ancient theaters, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one and often find our next great topic there. For now, as we leave the flickering ghost of Greek fire behind on the dark water, hold onto this final thought. History often teaches us that the most enduring power rarely comes from sheer force. It comes from a spark of ingenuity, fiercely protected and brilliantly applied. It comes from an idea kept so close that it becomes a legend, a whisper of flame that can, against all odds, hold back the tide.